The following episode features a historic article from the Nebraska History Magazine. This article may reflect the language and attitudes of its time, and while it offers valuable insight into the past, may contain expressions or viewpoints that are outdated or offensive by today's standards. Any outdated terms do not reflect the current views or perspectives of the Nebraska State Historical Society. Welcome to the Nebraska History Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Goforth. Each episode, we explore articles written and published in Nebraska History Magazine. In 1902, there were only a few automobiles, and they were seen as toys for the rich. But year after year, more vehicles hit the road. In this episode, we go back to the early 20th century in Omaha and discover how well the automobile was accepted into society and the expectations people had on drivers through the 1980 Nebraska History Magazine article, "The Devil Wagon Comes to Omaha, the First Decade of the Automobile," written by Tommy R. Thompson. One of the first automobiles Omahans ever saw was a machine brought to the city for the Trans-Mississippi Exposition of 1898. But this auto was a rarity. As the 20th century opened, the people of Omaha depended on streetcar, carriage, and the very popular bicycle for transportation. It was an age when local citizens worried about proper attire for cycling and the need of the city to repair potholed streets to prevent injury to riders out for a spin on their wheel. For most people, the automobile was more of a dream than a reality, a possible luxury if one came upon sudden riches. Still, some Omahans began to sense the impact of the auto. As the year 1902 commenced, the Omaha Daily News declared that no one could yet fully understand the significance of the automobile. At this time, it was only a toy limited to the wealthy, but eventually, the horseless carriage was bound to be recognized as one of the successful means of locomotion. By 1902, the automobile was becoming a more permanent fixture in the city. Interested citizens could examine the Oldsmobile, which was, quote, inexpensive, elegant, simple, and durable, end quote. The Waverly Electric, described by dealer J.J.D. Wright as, quote, easily controlled, clean, noiseless, easy riding, and comfortable, end quote. Or a wide range of steam, gasoline, and electric autos at Henry Fredrickson's store at 15th and Capitol. Fredrickson offered customers a service called the Auto Stable. He would store the owner's machine and deliver it to his business or residence when asked to do so by a simple phone call. Members of the local Smart Set began to frequent Omaha dealerships in search of the new machines, and enough of them made purchases by 1902 to compose a new interest group in Omaha. At that time, owners of the horseless carriage organized the Omaha Automobile Club to arrange, quote, a schedule of club runs Sundays and evenings, end quote. The first excursions occurred in June when 12 machines, the number was reduced to strong winds, drove through the city. It would not be long before members discovered a more valuable use for the club, a means of opposing city legislation for regulating the automobile. In June 1902, Councilman Fred H. Hoy introduced an ordinance for such regulation. It provided that automobiles would be limited to a maximum speed within city limits of 12 miles per hour and required that motorists carry lamps after dark. Hoy's proposed law called for Omaha drivers to operate vehicles with an obedience to the laws of the road and provided a fine of $25 if they failed to do so. The council referred this measure to Comptroller John D. Westberg for study, since he was considered the auto authority in the city hall. Westberg also was a member of the Automobile Club. Omaha motorists responded cautiously to Hoy's ordinance. Many of them met in June at a gathering at the Automobile Club to assess the situation. The position of the club reflected that of Omaha automobile owners, most of whom were members. At the meeting, members agreed that a speed limit was a good idea. They felt 12 miles per hour was not realistic, especially when compared to existing speed limits for the trolley cars at 10 miles per hour in the business district, 12 in residential areas, and bicycles 8 and 10 miles per hour. The club members decided they might suggest some additions to Hoy's ordinance, such as the need to require a horn on all vehicles. However, automobilists had little to worry about concerning the ordinance. Comptroller Westberg would not bother to report on the measure until 1 year later. The reaction of Omaha automobile owners was somewhat stronger regarding another issue. In late July, the Park Commission amended the rules governing parks and streets designated boulevards by banning automobiles from these areas temporarily. Members of the Park Commission felt this action was necessary until horses become accustomed and were unafraid of the autos. Accidents had occurred in the parks when horses and autos had met. This policy did not meet with the approval of the Automobile Club. Members appeared before the commission with a conciliatory offer for modification of the new rules. The motorists agreed, if allowed to drive in the parks, not to exceed 12 miles per hour, to carry 2 carriage lights after dark, to pull towards the right when approaching a horse, and to slow down if a team seemed nervous. The members of the Automobile Club acknowledged that there had been some accidents in the parks involving horses, but most of these were minor. In fact, the most serious accident had occurred when a team of horses smashed the auto of George Patterson, a club member. In August, the committee appointed by the Automobile Club appeared before the Park Commission in a peaceable session and successfully persuaded the latter to moderate its stand. After listening to arguments by the committee for an hour and a half, the Park Commission granted autos the use of all parks and boulevards except Hanscom and Riverview Parks and Central Boulevard between 10th and 20th Streets. The commission included the latter because of its sharp curves, steep inclines, and narrow roadways. In other parks and on remaining boulevards, the speed of automobiles would be limited to 10 miles per hour. Presumably, both sides found this compromise acceptable. The Automobile Club agreed that automobilists would endeavor to have the rules adopted lived up to and would assist the park board in enforcing them. The Park Commission defended its restrictions as a reasonable means of protecting Omaha citizens from speeding machines in areas designated for leisure and recreation. In addition, the commission intended to recommend that the Omaha City Council adopt an ordinance requiring lights, licensing, and numbering of autos. If the council failed to act, the commission would be considered adopting additional regulations itself. While Omaha motorists undoubtedly were pleased with this partial reversal by the Park Commission, they had even more reason to celebrate a few days later. On August 18th, the Daily News reported that Hoy's ordinance for regulation of autos might never reach the council floor for a vote. Comptroller Westberg had found a general ordinance already in existence which regulated speed in Omaha and indicated there was no need for additional legislation. But Omahans concluded just the opposite. As the number of automobiles increased, accompanying problems became more evident. Speeding drivers paid little heed to citizens' safety and property. They sped along Omaha streets, smashing into buggies, wagons, and pedestrians. In many cases, drivers fled the scene rather than face the consequences. Even the upper class, pro-automotive Omaha Excelsior, declared in the fall of 1902 that it was appropriate to call automobiles devil wagons, since they dash into trees, into stone walls, jump fences, and break over bridge parapets to wreck themselves and their occupants on the ground below. In 1903, the situation grew worse. By summer, something had to be done. In June, Chief of Police John J. Donahue ordered the arrest of all speedsters traveling, quote, faster than the ordinary gait of a horse or more rapidly than they could stop their machines at short notice, end quote. Donahue, admiring New York law, said, quote, New York limits the progress to 4 miles an hour. That speed should be fast enough for Omaha, end quote. He probably did not know automobilists in New York City were ignoring the speed limit. Violations there were so blatant that the city hired 6 professional bicycle riders, including mile-a-minute Murphy, to chase speeding autos. Soon after Chief Donahue handed down his ultimatum to Omaha automobilists, the council acted. It voted both to revive Hoy's ordinance of the previous summer and to introduce a new ordinance. The latter of these measures, reflecting the prevailing sentiment towards motorists, limited the speed of autos to 5 miles per hour in the business district and 8 in residential areas. One auto owner, disturbed by this ordinance, decided to take matters into his own hands. He hoped to convert Harry B. Zimmern, president of the council and chairman of the Judiciary Committee, which was considering the restrictive ordinance, to a pro-automobile position by demonstrating to him the thrill of speed. The motorist coaxed Zimmern into his machine at the ballpark and drove him to 16th and Harney Streets in 4.5 minutes. At the end of the trip, Zimmern was gasping with fear and rage. Shortly thereafter, he declared that the speed ordinance definitely would pass. Before the final passage of the speed ordinance, Omaha drivers did succeed in gaining a slight modification of the measure. When the city council met to consider the ordinance, automobile dealers H.E. Fredrickson and J.J.D. Wright spoke against the proposed speed limits of 5 and 8 miles per hour. Probably as a result of these individuals' influence, the council voted to change the speeds to 7 and 12 miles per hour, and the measure passed in that form. Members of the Omaha Automobile Club may have well been surprised to learn a week later that Mayor Frank E. Moores had vetoed the ordinance. He did so, he said, because the speed limit of 12 miles per hour voted by the council for residential areas was, quote, too great for the safety of the people generally who use the streets, end quote. The mayor expressed concern that drivers might lose control of their autos. Also, during the summer months, children used the streets as playgrounds, and, quote, if automobiles were permitted to go tearing through the streets at 12 miles per hour, some terrible accident would sure to result, end quote. It was Moore's opinion that if Omaha drivers wanted to travel at a high rate of speed, or anything over 8 miles per hour, they could use the country roads. Immediately following the veto by Mayor Moores, the city council considered the possibility of another ordinance, although nothing definitive surfaced until late summer. At that time, the council called upon City Attorney Carl C. Wright to prepare the measure. The one he drafted was based on one used in Chicago and called for a limit of speed of 6 miles per hour in the business district and 8 in residential areas. Certain equipment would be required on all autos: lights on the front and rear, white for the front, red for the rear of the vehicle, a horn or a bell, and brakes capable of stopping the auto within 10 feet. The vehicle had to display a license number in white letters 5 inches high on the rear, illuminated by a small white light. But most disturbing to Omaha motorists was a provision that all drivers would have to pass an exam as to their qualifications to operating machines, but no demonstration of their driving skill. The examining board was to be comprised of city electrician, boiler inspector, and chief of police. If the board found an applicant to be mentally, physically, and morally competent, then he paid a small fee and received a vehicle license number. However, if a citizen filed a complaint against a driver charging negligence and the examining board sustained the accusation, his license shall be forever revoked. Presumably, this included a violation of the provision which made it, quote, obligatory for every driver to stop and investigate whenever his car strikes a person or vehicle in the street, end quote. Omaha automobilists met to discuss the proposed ordinance after the council decided that the measure should be passed into law. Although the motorists at the meeting all spoke with a conciliatory spirit, they disliked the examination process, the requirement for lights, and the low speed limits. The latter they denounced as impracticable. It was the consensus of those attending the meeting that the motorists should send a representative committee to meet with the council in an effort to very much modify the provisions of the ordinance, if not to carry the whole matter over until next year, this driving season being so nearly at an end. In the meantime, all present agreed that one of the best tactics that they would pursue would be to exercise unusual care until automobiles were firmly established and understood in Omaha. The representatives of the automobilists succeeded in persuading the council to put the proposed ordinance on the back burner, at least until the following spring. They met with the members of the council and agreed that vehicles needed identification numbers. However, after the meeting, the ordinance remained in an unperfected state. A disposition to regulate automobiles in Omaha by late 1903 was not dead, but merely delayed. The council recognized that the horseless carriage was becoming a permanent part of Omaha life. Every day, more citizens of means were purchasing Ramblers, Wintons, waterless Knoxes, locomobiles, Cadillacs, or even Fords. Ladies were taking a seat behind the wheel, and fashion articles in newspapers instructed them as to the proper attire for driving. Perhaps some of the women motorists purchased long coats of rainproof silks fashioned for automobile use, reported as the most captivating of all 1903 fall styles for automobiling. Less expensive but probably popular were the trifles for lady motorists on the market. A newspaper article related that chain charms in the shape of tiny gold and silver automobiles abound. Other signs of the growing acceptance of the automobile were more obvious. The Exarban Festival in early October featured a parade which included 26 autos decorated with poppies, roses, and chrysanthemums. And, in keeping with the spirit of progress, King Exarban and his lovely queen rode in the lead vehicle. The Christmas season brought with it the use of the automobile in ads to attract the reader's attention of miniature auto toys for the children, just like the big toys of their parents, at least of affluent parents. An enterprising business in Connecticut advertised in late November that any young girl who sold 20 articles at 10 cents each supplied by the firm could have for her very own a new Wonder Doll. This magnificent toy could say Mama and Papa. It came with a mechanical automobile which moved by spring with great speed. Locally, J.L. Brandeis & Sons department store in an ad featured Santa Claus flying over rooftops with innumerable toys, not in a sleigh led by Dasher and Dancer, but in an automobile. Lastly, if anything signaled a general acceptance of the horseless carriage in Omaha by late 1903, it was its recognition by the tax assessor. For the first time, automobiles were taxed as personal property. Of course, owners of the autos felt their machines were nothing with which the tax assessor should become overly concerned. Emil Brandeis, for example, suggested that his $3,000 Peerless should be valued at $100 for the purpose of taxation, a figure raised to $1,000 by the assessor. The inescapable fact remained that regulation of the automobile was needed. There was enough sentiment in the fall of 1903 to prompt the Daily News to editorialize that it might be very appropriate to label the auto the Red Devil. Unfortunately, said the news, an individual upon entering an auto seemed to be overcome by a satanic spell and developed a complete disregard for the life and safety of other people. The only means of controlling the reckless driver, it appeared, would be to treat the scorcher to a schooling of arrests, fines, and horsewhippings. Not everyone took such a harsh position. The Omaha Excelsior pointed out that some of the, quote, uninitiated still looked suspiciously at a so-called Red Devil and cannot be induced to get into one, end quote. Yet those same individuals enjoyed a ride with a spirited team of horses. The Excelsior could have added that everyone noticed an automobile involved in an accident, but few paid attention to similar accidents perpetrated by carriages. Still, the Excelsior supported regulation of the automobile in 1904. Early that spring, as some young men's fancy turned to love, others opted for a fast automobile. Once again, speedsters became a nuisance. In March, Chief Donahue announced, quote, that the fast and reckless driving of automobiles in the city must stop once and for all, end quote. Citizens complained to him daily that autos had come dangerously close to hitting them. Donahue, only warning speedsters at first, now began arresting them. He also supported an ordinance which set speed limits and required identification numbers. The city council resumed discussion of the need for a regulatory ordinance, and in mid-April, Zimmern introduced an ordinance similar to the one proposed the previous August. The ordinance set a limit of 6 miles per hour for the business district, required each automobile to have a gong, horn, whistle, or bell to be sounded at each street intersection, an identification number registered with the city and painted in letters 5 inches high, a red light for the rear, and a white light in the front to illuminate the license number after dark, and brakes capable of stopping the car within 10 feet. Lastly, drivers had to pay a license fee of $2 and a deposit, a bond of $100. The News declared the ordinance, quote, so rigid as to be unreasonable, end quote. It would be an injustice to hold vehicles to a speed limit of 6 miles per hour when carriages could travel at 10 to 12 and streetcars at 15 to 20. In reality, said the News, the majority of drivers were responsible and safe. The situation could be improved if Chief Donahue simply would make some of the arrests he talked about. If an ordinance was needed, the News favored one which would not be oppressive but rigidly enforced. Automobile dealer Clark Powell echoed these sentiments when he stated that this ordinance was more suited to a backwoods town of the South than for a city like Omaha. The city council passed an ordinance basically the same as the one proposed, although it provided 8 and 12 miles per hour limits in the business and residential areas, lowered the registration fee to $1, and eliminated the bond. The measure passed only after, quote, a great deal of quibbling and several passages at arms and much objection by owners of automobiles, end quote. The ordinance went into effect May 24th, when the mayor did not veto the measure. Omaha now had its first ordinance regulating automobiles. Perhaps as an act of defiance, just 2 days after passage of the ordinance, speeding motorists caused a rash of runaways, more than Chief Donahue had seen in weeks. Also, automobile owners were slow to obey the registration provision. In the first week of its existence, only 52 owners complied. According to the News, this figure represented 1/3 of Omaha autos. However, the total number of automobiles in the city probably was much smaller. By mid-July, 83 owners had registered their autos. Some were trying to use one registration for several vehicles. Chief Donahue warned that he would arrest any driver who did not have a number on his automobile, failed to secure a number for each auto, or refused to observe the speed limits. Omaha drivers paid little attention to Donahue's warnings, particularly those concerning speed. In June 1904, residents of the Clifton Hill area complained about speedsters, one of whom police timed as he was, quote, scorching down Military Avenue at a rate of 40 miles per hour, end quote. The auto carried license number 46, which was registered to the Rambler Automobile Company. Investigation revealed that the driver was a potential purchaser from Manning, Iowa, who was out for a test drive. Since the number was registered in the name of the Rambler Company, the police were reluctant to prosecute the dealer or the purchaser. A few days later, an officer swore that he saw A.I. Root, president of the Root Printing Company, or at least his auto, scorching at about the same rate of speed on 28th Street between Farnham and Leavenworth. The officer went to the scene after Councilmember Zimmern called the police department, which reiterated a determination to arrest the drivers of these whiz carts. Complaints were coming to City Hall at such a rapid rate, City Clerk William H. Elborn called the automobile ordinance a nuisance. Elborn felt Omahans were too jumpy, often telephoning for identification of a car or to request that someone be sent to check the car's speed. Some women called to find out with whom acquaintances were riding. Elborn said he intended to ask the council to raise the license fee so that he could hire another clerk to answer the telephone. The real problem in 1904 was whether Omaha society was willing to enforce its new ordinance. In June, A.I. Root had the dubious honor of appearing in municipal court, typically called police court, in the first case prosecuted under the law. He was there to answer for his alleged speed on 28th Street. The officer who witnessed the event testified that he had been unable to stop Root's vehicle, but that he did see license number 17, which was registered to Root. Unfortunately, the officer had not been able to identify Root as the driver because of the speed of the auto and because the incident occurred in late evening. Due to the lack of positive identification, the court dismissed the case. Police were unhappy with the decision. They wanted to hold the owner of the automobile responsible for a speeding incident, regardless of the driver. This leniency, or confusion, regarding prosecution under the speed ordinance continued. In July, Chief Donahue himself witnessed a speeding incident. As he was going home from work, an auto shot by at a high rate of speed. Donahue identified the automobile by its number, 61. The machine belonged to Emil Brandeis, who received notice to appear in police court. Brandeis appeared, but informed Donahue that Frank Decker, his chauffeur, was driving the auto at the time of the incident. Brandeis did not ask that charges be dropped, but requested that the case be postponed in order that Decker might drive Brandeis's car in a scheduled race at the Sprague Street Drive Park. Chief Donahue agreed to the postponement. The following Monday, Decker appeared in court. Chief Donahue testified that he saw Decker flying, quote, like a bird at a rate of not less than 40 miles per hour, end quote. Donahue in earlier reports said Decker was traveling at 60 to 100 miles per hour. Decker replied that he was unfamiliar with the auto and had accidentally opened the throttle too far. The judge accepted the story and dismissed the charges with the explanation that the auto, not the driver, was to blame for the incident. Obviously, the police court did not yet consider the automobile a serious problem, probably because there were relatively few autos in Omaha. The police department, despite Donahue's protestations, reacted in a similar manner, adopting a modest policy by arresting only 9 drivers in 1904. Foot patrol officers, of course, were handicapped. A small bicycle squad had trouble catching the speedy whiz wagons. Outraged Omahans occasionally took matters into their own hands. Grain broker Sewell Sluman had his machine showered with eggs on Dodge Street. Mrs. H.E. Fredrickson and a party of 5 women were bombarded with cantaloupe rinds. H. Vance Lane, manager of the Nebraska Telephone Company, was repeatedly stoned and someone shot at Dana C. Bradford, president of Bradford Kennedy Lumber Company. Although boys were often the perpetrators of these activities, much of it undoubtedly reflected the citizens' concern over speeding autos, the scaring of horses, and the occasional accident. A more mature attitude by Omahans towards the automobile developed in 1905. The news commented on the increasing feeling that motor vehicles be regulated and restricted. The main concern, according to the news, was the fool in the auto, who should be exterminated. This, of course, was hyperbole, but the moderate response did develop. The legislature, in 1905, passed the first state law to regulate the automobile. Similar to Omaha's ordinance in 1904, it required state registration of all motor vehicles and provided for a maximum fine of only $25 versus a city fine of up to $100. Locally, the Omaha Automobile Club became more involved in the attempt to encourage responsible driving. The club recommended that members not pay speeding fines levied against their chauffeurs. Also, the club began to offer $20 rewards for information regarding hit-and-run accidents. The Daily News strongly endorsed this latter move, declaring it would help allay the suspicion that every man who owns or drives a car is a speed maniac, careless of the lives of all who may chance to cross his path. Still, many Omaha automobile owners and drivers maintained a defensive and even indifferent attitude towards responsible driving. The Automobile Club revealed that its members would support one another in unavoidable accidents and would resist damage suits, although liability insurance became more popular by 1905. In April 1905, the auto of Emil Brandeis, driven by his chauffeur, struck D.R. Rundle of Minnesota at 16th and Douglas, and the victim died soon thereafter. Brandeis told a coroner's jury that he had expected Rundle to move from the vehicle's path. Instead, he seemed confused and appeared to leap towards the car. The coroner's jury decided that Rundle had committed suicide since he knew he had cancer of the stomach. He was listed as having died from cancer, hastened by being run over by an automobile. During the next few years, the situation regarding the automobile in Omaha changed little. In 1907, the police department finally began to adjust to a changing technology by renting 2 motorcycles to chase speedsters, and in the following year purchased 2 first-class machines. Motorcycle officers were made responsible for arrest of speeding drivers, but 2 men were insufficient for the job, and police lobbied for more motorcycles. However, some critics felt that the department, more precisely Chief Donahue, did not want to make arrests and anger influential people. The Daily News claimed that Donahue ordered an occasional crusade only when the public pressure became too great. And in 1909, the Omaha World-Herald ran a page 1 cartoon showing the chief with dark glasses and a white cane proclaiming, quote, "I see nothing particularly alarming in the auto speed situation," end quote. The police court also continued to receive its share of criticism regarding ineffective enforcement of speed limits. It dismissed many cases because an officer wasn't able to stop the speeding motorist and make an arrest. The judge would not accept a case based only on an officer's recording of the license number. A major complaint was that the police court did not penalize speeders severely enough. The News declared that the judges did little more than tell a speeder he was naughty. An examination of fines given speeders tended to bear out this charge. In 1907, 1908, and in 1909, the court heard a total of just over 60 cases for speeding. In these, the average fine was slightly over $10. It was not unusual to assess higher penalties, including jail sentences for prostitution, vagrancy, drunkenness, and letting minors play pool. It was a constant demand that speeders be sent to jail for a few days. But in 1909, a judge who said he would follow such a policy failed to carry out his threat, probably because ordinances did not provide such a penalty or because state law allowed jail sentences only on the second offense. Regardless of the penalty, a few Omahans escaped fines by applying to the mayor for pardons. From July 1907 through June of 1911, municipal court records show Mayor James C. Dahlman pardoned 17 drivers convicted of speeding. While the mayor was criticized for the use of his pardoning power, these cases represented only 6% of speeding cases before the court. Throughout 1907 through 1909, the Omaha Automobile Club issued statements condemning speeding. In 1908, the club encouraged members to inform the president and the police when they saw members speeding. It is unknown whether members turned in offenders, but if they did, speeding still did not stop. The club now called for stricter but reasonable regulation before a serious accident prompted drastic laws. The council did pass a new law in 1907, which kept the old speed limits but raised the minimum fine to $500. However, as previously noted, the police court tended to levy fines much below this sum. The only notable accomplishment of the club during this period benefited the members. By an agreement with Chief Donahue, the club gave member cards signed by Donahue to serve as bail if the police stopped them for speeding. This eliminated the embarrassment of going to the police station but guaranteed the offender would appear in court. Also, the club promised to penalize them a year's dues. One city official condemning the special privilege cards declared Donahue was, quote, in league with a band of known persistent violators of the law, end quote, and stated a club for porch climbing house burglars should be formed so that they could have cards too. Obviously, by 1910, efforts to regulate automobiles were insufficient, and owners continued to flaunt the law. Some, for example, allowed their children to drive. In 1909, the Daily News did a feature story on the youngest driver in Omaha, 12-year-old Jack Summers, son of Dr. and Mrs. John E. Summers, grandson of pioneer lumberman George A. Hoagland. The news reported that young Summers had driven on Omaha streets at a speed of 55 miles per hour. While this might horrify some citizens, the newspaper concluded that he, quote, is careful and toots his horn persistently when he turns corners or passes streetcars or even slower autos, end quote. Whoever was driving, accidents continued in large numbers. In 1910, some Omahans formed an anti-automobile club, referred to as the Humanity Club, which wanted enforcement of the speed limits and prohibition of young drivers. The club provided legal advice and assistance when necessary to those injured. The Omaha Automobile Club was probably accurate when it stated in 1910, quote, we have reached the point where the automobile is regarded as a good thing, end quote. Still, changes were needed. The club urged that signs and danger signals be placed at intersections where accidents might occur and recommended that motorcycle officers wear uniforms. The sight of uniformed officers, they say, would deter speeding, and drivers would not flee from uniformed officers as they did others, whom they might mistake for bandits. Ordinances were passed in June prohibiting children under 16 from driving, and provided that joyriders be sent to jail for from 5 to 30 days for each offense. 1 week after the council acted in 1909, young Jack Summers was arrested under the first of these ordinances, although the judge dismissed charges after delivering a lecture. But all these events were insignificant when compared to a devastating accident on June 21st. An auto driven by Alex Schultz, owner of a car rental firm, struck another auto at 34th and Leavenworth, killing William Krug of Krug Brewing Company. Reaction to this accident was immediate and strong. The World Herald called Alex Schultz a driver with an unsavory record. Schultz had been to court several times, and in 1909 was fined $100 for reckless driving. The president of the park board declared that the police were not doing their job, and the Excelsior suggested that offending drivers should be thrown in jail. The threat of spending time in the black hole claimed the Excelsior would make drivers more careful. A judge pointed out, though, that speeding cases were, quote, one of the most delicate matters with which he had to deal, end quote. While the comments flew, Schultz sat in jail, and the World Herald felt his incarceration accurately reflected public sentiment. Schultz was charged with manslaughter in the district court on August 1st. A jury found him guilty, and a judge sentenced him to 3 years in the penitentiary. The Supreme Court upheld the sentence. The death of Krug and prosecution of Schultz shocked the community into the realization that greater regulation of the automobile was necessary. The police court began handing out more and stiffer fines. During the first 6 months of 1911, the court fined 130 drivers, an average fine of about $20. The legislature in 1911 passed a stricter law which provided those under 16 could not drive. The law set higher fines, and if a driver caused injuries or death while violating provisions of the law, he could be fined $200 to $500 or be sentenced 1 to 10 years in jail. While these changes would not end problems associated with the automobile, as the situation today shows us, they did reflect a determination to impose controls for the welfare of society. 10 years earlier, the automobile had been only a toy for the affluent. The number of machines had increased dramatically from year to year, and motor vehicles were no longer mere pleasure cars, but delivery trucks, moving vans, and taxi cabs. After a decade, Omaha society had accepted the automobile in all its forms, but Omahans also expected drivers to use their machines in a safe and responsible manner, and not as devil wagons. Thank you for listening to the Nebraska History Podcast. To learn more about the Nebraska History Magazine, to listen to more podcasts, or to support our podcast by becoming a member of the Nebraska State Historical Society, go to history.nebraska.gov/podcast. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and get notified when we release a new episode on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time, I'm Chris Goforth.